Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midweek Brief. My name is Anthony, and it's a pleasure to have you here. Whilst you're here, please subscribe to the channel for more videos like this and for more informative information to make your lives easier. Now, before we start, as always, I like to mention our Traders Hub, but also this week I want to mention to our existing traders, Traders Toolbox. It's got everything you need in here. It's all free. If your account is approved and verified, you can go ahead and you can use these features. We've got calculators on here. We've got signal charts, trading central, economic calendars. We can go down further and we can also see that there is notifications, alarm manager, correlations traders. There's so much to talk about. In fact, it might be wise that we cover that in a future session. However, please go ahead and use this. You are entitled to it. Now, let's go and have a look at a week ahead in the news. Well, week ahead, what's been happening over the past few days. Every day is an exciting adventure on this planet, this third rock from the sun. Now, first things first, let's quickly touch on the elections. Not so much in terms of opinion polls or numbers game here, but there has been a development on Biden's side of the campaign. His daughter, Ashley Biden, back in 2022, had her diary stolen, left behind at a friend's house, which was then later sold to Project Veritas, which made its way to the Trump party. Of course, it's wrong. Theft in any form or anything along that matter is wrong. But when you're a politically exposed person such as Ashley Biden, then it would make sense to be a bit extra careful. And I'm not really sure how many people have diaries nowadays anyway. Some would say this was a cry for help because inside the diary, it did mention her grandfather and her father. And let's put it this way, abusive nature and showers together. And it's should be headline news because this is about the current president, leader of the free world, Joe Biden. And if this was if this was Elon Musk, any billionaire, if this was a political representative such as Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, if this was Donald Trump, this would all be front page news worldwide. It would be affecting particular markets, companies that are affiliated with, let's say, Joe Biden. But it's not. You have to really go digging for this. Now, this isn't necessarily going to affect the markets, but this is something that will be brought up again as part of the campaign trail. It's very damaging when you read into it for Joe Biden. But as I said, of course, these media companies are not going to cover it. Let's get to the point that we're in a game of chess. A lot of these media companies, especially in this case, ABC News, a lot of media companies are actually owned by different parties, consortiums, and a lot of these consortiums or owners tend to be a bit more left-leaning, more Democratic Party leaning. So, of course, they're not going to cover it and expose Joe Biden. But a lot of people are center or right will find this news, and Trump will use this in time. It's just a matter of time and when is right for him. Um, because America doesn't have the same defamation laws that we have, let's say, in UK or other parts of the world. This is a small acorn to grow into a bigger oak tree when the time is right. So it's best that we understand fully what's going on now. So when the time comes, we're aware. Biden, now we're staying on the Biden thing, but it goes into the Israel situation. He's calling for an urgent ceasefire. In fact, he's also got his wife to call for it. So I'm trying to keep a straight face when I handle the news for you guys on a weekly basis. I try to sit on the fence and be unbiased as possible, unlike a lot of the news channels. But I'm still human, and there are still articles or news that makes me laugh sometimes too. The reason I laugh about this has got nothing to do with the actual Israel-Gaza situation. It's the hypocrisy. 1 minute America is vetoing a ceasefire through the United Nations. A month later, they're calling for a ceasefire. Then they announced that 60% of Israel's weapons industry is actually American products or American military equipment. Then America say that they're going to stop selling, but they're not going to stop selling because they make too much money from it. It goes round in circles. They keep calling for a ceasefire. Now, the irony is there has been two ceasefire talks that have come to nothing. And in fact, over the past few days, there has been a ceasefire talk, which was rejected by Hamas. Now, we don't know the full details of what was included in that ceasefire agreement. However, we can go based off of previous ceasefire agreement negotiations, and then we can take pieces apart and see what is more likely to be discussed. We know that Israel's stance is on their ceasefire agreement, they want the complete, uh, dissolve Hamas so they can never appear again as a political party, as a terrorist organization, whatever you may want to label it as, and the release of all hostages. Then it leaves room open for what Israel have suggested and Egypt have suggested to have an Arab-led coalition to occupy and police Gaza going forward and not Israeli soldiers. Hamas have rejected this call and this arrogance and from Israel, but that's as much as we know. So we don't know actually what is in the ceasefire deal. So whilst the whole world are pushing for a ceasefire, to be fair, Israel are trying to do a ceasefire because Netanyahu is being pressured from the international community, from his own people, from his own political parties and other political parties within Israel. So he's receiving pressure across the board. Now, the thing that you have to be careful about here is I'm all for a ceasefire, and I'm sure that most people are for a ceasefire. But we've got a few issues here that we need to address. The more that the international community are likely to push Netanyahu, the bigger the damage could be. And let me explain. When a leader is desperate and they're losing control, not just at home, but internationally, once they start receiving pressure from all directions, that's when they can make rash, snap, idiotic decisions. Now, we saw that several days ago, they withdrew troops from Khan Yunis, and they've brought them to the middle Gaza part of the Gaza Strip. People saw that as a positive development. Then they started talking about ceasefire, and that was a positive development. Now the ceasefire has been rejected, and because the international community are keep calling for a ceasefire, but Israel are trying to sit at the table. But again, we don't know what's in it, so maybe it is totally an arrogant ceasefire deal. Now that from a military perspective, pulling out all your troops means that you might then send them back in because it's just a rally call. You're just rallying your troops. So withdrawing all of the troops may be seen as a good thing at first, but from a military point of view, it just means that they could go in again even heavier. Hopefully not, but that's what is possible here. And the more that the international community and leaders, a lot of them virtue signaling, but the more that they do this, the more pressure, and it's more likely to force Netanyahu's hand to do something that is going to upset a lot of people. Now, I'm not saying that people should bury their head in the sands and just let this go on and not say anything and not have their opinions, but you have to time it. And America are totally mishandling this. Every day they're calling for a ceasefire. Next day, Jill Biden is speaking on her husband's behalf, even though he's president of the country, and it's just making a laughing stock of them. But it's also putting pressure on Netanyahu. And I think what we need to really do is just focus on the ceasefire side of things to calm this down. Um, this is obviously a factor towards gold, which I will update you on shortly. So, in terms of Israel, big talk at the moment is ceasefire, but also Iran have vowed that they are going to get revenge for the attacks in Syria on the Iran Revolutionary Guard. So that's something that we're waiting in anticipation to see what is going to happen there. A lot of talk also nowadays, and this comes in waves every few months. You always hear about it: Chinese cyber attacks, China, Taiwan, China this, China that. The truth of the matter is, a lot of it is scaremongering. This has got no personal bias to this at all. I look at the facts, and the facts of the matter are there's a reason China have not sided with Russia. They have verbally, but they've not sent any troops. They're not logistically helping Russia that much at all. It's because China's biggest consumers, the biggest buyers for China is the West. We buy a lot of products from China. They make a lot of money. Their economy is so reliant upon it. They are not, or are very unlikely to throw all of that away to go and join a war that isn't theirs. If China are going to risk all that, then they're going to do it for a war that is theirs. And that's why people say, well, the Taiwan situation. Not necessarily. Again, it will damage their international relations. I think if China are going to go down this route of conflict, then they're going to make sure it's something that is worth it. And I don't think the Taiwan situation is. And people talk about there's a lot of military activity and exercises going on. This is no different than NATO or America, who have exercises and drills going on all over the planet anyway. It's just scaremongering. What we have seen here, according to Financial Times, Taiwanese groups, when they say groups, they mean a mixture of manufacturing companies because Taiwan is a big exporter and manufacturer. are going to start duplicating their headquarters abroad. So they'll have a headquarters in Taiwan and a headquarters maybe in America or Britain, other parts of the world. And that's just in case there is an attack. Now, this sounds so scary, but countries have done this for years. Companies have done this for years. This is nothing new. This is just a bit of clickbait, perhaps. So take it with a pinch of salt because the facts of the matter are, if we look at Chinese exports, yes, during COVID, the lead up to COVID, situation, there was a massive amount of export out of China for PPE equipment. This is no secret. This is all facts. You can see it here. Then after the virus, their economy suffered just like most economies. And then it's only over the past year or two, it started to pick up its exporting rate and people buying again. They are not going to throw all of that away when they are trying to recover their economy over conflicts that are not theirs. To prove this even more so, you can see that their import rate, because they still have to import compared to a lot of countries, but on a lesser scale because they manufacture and produce so much. But their import rate had gone up over previous years, and this year it's at half, but we haven't even got halfway through the year to fully close this year and get a real statistic on it. But they're importing a lot still. So ideally, China wants to become a major exporter and lower down its importing, and then it can start thinking about expansion and other plans. Because at the moment, doesn't seem right timing. To back up that claim too, here's an article that was written back in 2018, How Sea Fogs Influence Inland Visibility on the Southern China Coast. Now, you don't have to read this all. It's all out there for free. We can put links in the comments if you request it. In a nutshell, the South China Sea, a bit like the North Sea off the coast of England, is quite a volatile sea. It has a lot of fog certain times of the year. In fact, most mornings you'll wake up and see fog. Now, from a maritime perspective, from a military perspective, fog is not a good thing. A lot of people say, why don't you just go through it? It's not that. It interferes with radar. It interferes with navigation in general. If you were to conduct a military operation, you would only do it under those conditions if it was absolute desperately needed defense, usually. But that doesn't seem the case here because there's only two windows of opportunity that last about a month to 6 weeks a year, and we're coming up to one of them in the South China Sea where the fog lifts, the weather season changes, and then the summer kicks in, and then another window appears. The reason this is significant is because unlike the Russia-Ukraine situation, where for about 2, 3 weeks leading up to the conflict, we could see Russian troops were building up. Here, we don't see Chinese troops building up. We see the Navy activity, we see military drills, but we don't see a massive build-up. And with that window approaching, it doesn't seem likely that they're going to go for it. In truth, China are probably, because they've been doing it for thousands of years, will play the waiting game and probably just wait until November to see which president comes into power, and then they will know the condition of the pitch that they're playing on, if you want to put it that way. So I think if you see a lot of news about China, Taiwan, a lot of it is scaremongering and probably just to divert your attention elsewhere whilst other things are going on, as we all know. If we go over to Yemen and the Red Sea area, relating to China, China exports a lot through the Red Sea. We know that 10% of the world's trade, sometimes fluctuating up to 15%, but on average 10% goes through the Red Sea. That's including a lot of exports from China. The Houthi rebels here in Yemen did state in the past that they have no intention to harm Russian or Chinese vessels. That is not the case. Several days ago, a Chinese vessel was hit. End of story. China are now on alert. This, ironically, a conflict can bring opposing sides together. We might see in the future some sort of coalition in the area with Chinese, British, Danish, American ships working together to police it. That is not far-fetched at all. In the Caribbean in the 1700s, just a quick history lesson, there was a huge piracy problem. England and Spain were at war with each other too, and the French. They were all at war. It was like a terrible love triangle. However, they did work together at one point to defeat piracy in the region because it became such a threat to the economies of all those empires, those kingdoms. So, yeah, it's happened before in history. It wouldn't be unrealistic for that to happen again. In terms of Yemen in general, the major development we got there is we're seeing more activity in the south of the country from government forces against Houthi rebels. And to the north, we're still seeing Saudi artillery strikes on Houthi rebels in the north. So, as I mentioned 2, 3 meetings before in the videos before, that this is something that could likely trigger a civil war in the region. I mean, there has been a war for decades on and off, but this could reignite it, and this would put a lot of strain on Iran as they fund and they supply the Houthi rebels, and that's kind of how it's designed as a proxy war. If we go on to what I've said to back up here, according to Bloomberg, China and Russia learn not even their ships are safe in the Red Sea. That again, that's just mentioning what I said before, that the Yemen-based group backed by Iran told Beijing and Moscow their ships wouldn't be targeted with missile and drone strikes. The Houthis fired a missile at a Chinese-owned oil tanker and caused a minor fire and no injuries, according to the US. So, yeah, there's the proof you need. Bloomberg are backing up what I mentioned too. If we go on to kind of the Red Sea, the US has seized Iranian weapons that were heading to Yemen to the Houthi rebels, and they've actually donated them to Ukraine. In terms of Ukraine, the biggest development there is we're seeing a lot of infighting in NATO, but especially between America and Europe. Europe wants to fund and help Ukraine still because they're convinced Russia are the bad guy here and they're going to invade the world. Whether you believe in that or not, it's a different story. But they're also trying to shrink down their military equipment that they're sending because there's only so much you can send, but it's the cost as well. America wants to increase how much it's sending, but they're now criticizing European nations and other NATO members saying you need to keep up. And if anything, Europe are trying to de-escalate the situation. Not always, but they're definitely more that way inclined. It just seems at the moment America wants to inflame the situation. So it seems America wants to inflame the Russia-Ukraine, but are calling for a ceasefire in Israel. But at the same time, they're providing weapons and selling them to Israel and donating them to Ukraine. And it's just a lot of hypocrisy going on. You can see it for yourselves. People can see it. Why can we see it? How do we know we're seeing it? Gold. Gold keeps going up. It keeps breaking new highs. Every week or two, it's breaking new highs. The other day, it broke new highs. All of this going on, people are not stupid. They can see the facts. Traders are not stupid people. You sit there and check news for a living compared to the average Joe. So you start to see the articles, you put the pieces together and go, oh, well, of course you would do that because it makes sense to do that, which leads to this effect, which then affects this. And it's just a chain reaction always. If we go on and look at the economic events for the week, it's a nice mixed bag. We've got US dollar, we've got Canadian dollar, we had New Zealand dollar, we've got British pound and euro mentioned. So definitely a lot to go over in terms of economic calendar. Again, use the Trading Central. Use it because it's free, it's included. Not all brokers will offer you this service. It's got a nice economic calendar, which we've got here. As we can see today, we've got inflation rates coming out. This is important for the United States, as Jerome Powell has said that he wants more inflation data to decide if he's going to cut or hike interest rates. So that would be an interesting one to keep an eye on. Core inflation rate year on year out of the United States. We got building permits coming out for the previous month for February out of Canada. Always a fun one, interesting. These little ones, although it's classed as high, sometimes they get ignored, sometimes they have an effect. But these are things that a lot of you can relate to. Mortgage approvals, building permits, how many houses are being built, what's the demand for it. If you're in one of these countries, such as Canada, then you have an advantage over others to know the kind of stance on that. We see out of Canada, we've got interest rate decision, although it's forecasted to be the same. All eyes will be on America or Bank of England for their interest rate decisions to see if they cut or hike it. We have a meeting, a press conference coming out later of the FOMC. I think more eyes are likely to be on this meeting as opposed to any interest rate decision out of the United States because people are expecting some form of action on interest rate. With inflation data coming out, it's going to be one of the first questions asked to Jerome Powell. We've got jobless claims coming out tomorrow, industrial production, and we've got GDP on Friday, as well as industrial production out of the United Kingdom. So, like I said, GDP, we've got CPI out the United States tomorrow. Several currencies there that can be traded, a lot of activity. If you don't feel comfortable trading these events, then as always, trade around them. Good risk management applies. Use this like a weather forecast. In terms of stocks, there's no individual stock that I wanted to focus on because we've come up to earnings season. So with that, it requires a lot of data. Look at individual companies, how much they've sold, the research and development costs, things like that to get a good indication. As I mentioned in a video last week, please go back and have a look. There are earnings calendars everywhere on the internet. Go ahead, look at them and see what companies are disclosing. But to relate back to the whole conflict situation, slide in defense stocks knocks down Europe's stock 600. Europe has produced a lot of military equipment over the years, very good quality. However, with the cost of materials and with the cost of this equipment, which is then sold on to other countries and other continents, European equipment is a lot more expensive, although higher quality is a lot more expensive than, let's say, Chinese made, Russian made equipment. Um, Still probably cheaper than the United States too. So although the stocks and military spending is up worldwide, we're seeing more interest from countries going to cheaper countries to buy the equipment to get more for their money, basically, especially with security worldwide the way it is. People want to make sure that they get as much ammunition and weapons as possible rather than quality over quantity, because the quality is only good if the soldiers are trained equally. And unfortunately, that's not always the case, especially in certain countries around the world where the investment on military training and equipment is not as high standard compared to some countries, let's say in the Western world or Japan, Australia, places like that. So this is time of year that although military spending up, it's a case of where are they spending that money, and that's when you start delving into that. And a nice little sort of wild card at the end. It doesn't affect the markets, not at the moment anyway. But some of you may have heard it. It's regarding the Scottish hate crime bill. We're not going to go into what's right or wrong here. That's your personal belief. We can all agree genuine hate speech is never a good thing. Threatening people, being racist, whatever it may be, is terrible. Um, Under this new law, it's basically too flexible, too easily abused. It basically, in a nutshell, it means that you can report anyone for an accusation of hate speech. Now, what you define as hate speech is one thing, that's a whole new subject, but it could be something to do with gender, race, religion, uh, as a starting point. And you could overhear and report someone. Now, the police are likely to throw out the case, but you would still appear on a criminal record. It will come up appearing as a non-crime reported incident. If you're applying for a job, that'll pop up. Now, if you're someone that's done nothing wrong, but you're applying for a job and it's a very big company and they check and they see that you've had 3 or 4 of these warnings, but nothing's actually charged, it's going to influence their decisions highly. Therefore, it is a violation of human rights. Um, Ironically, Humza Yousaf, the Prime Minister of Scotland, who came up with this law back in 2020, said what would be considered quite some racist remarks, which I'll let you go into and check in your own time. This is not the place for that. But he's actually received most of the complaints. So he's created a law allowing and inviting people to formally request investigation complaints, and people are doing it about him. To top it off, J.K. Rowling, who is a Scottish author, probably their biggest Scottish author, who was out of the country when this happened, but she went on the internet, posted her thoughts, and said, come arrest me," as she had some views on gender identity. The police said no, they're not going to. This has set a precedent that the police basically are not going to touch anyone, and it wouldn't surprise me if this law gets thrown out. To top it off with, Humza Yousaf's brother-in-law, as of today, is officially been arrested for abduction and extortion, some business-related crime. So, yeah, Nicola Sturgeon a few years ago resigned and was forced out for less. I think it's very likely that Humza Yousaf could be facing calls to resign and ousted out over coming days or weeks. I think this is very embarrassing for the SNP, the Scottish National Party, especially at a time when they've just got into power with, you know, the right amount of votes. Now they need to maintain a cruise control speed, and it's not going. So yeah, there's going to be some serious developments on that. Like I said, this is not something that affects the markets per se, but things like this, when they spread nearby to England, the United Kingdom whole, to America, Australia, France, other parts of Europe, that's when it can take an effect. That's when the more division it causes, the more it can affect the reputation of that country its economic stance, its foreign policy, and then it just keeps knocking on, knocking on. So yes, it does have an effect in the long term, perhaps. So interesting to look at it now. But to wrap it up on that note, please don't feel don't feel shy. Leave a comment, ask any questions, reach out to us, contact us on live chat if you have any questions, or if you want to speak to your representative, your account manager. Apart from that, use our Traders Hub, our toolkit. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week.